This is Unit 4.3 on big business. We've been looking at the Industrial Revolution. We start off by looking at how westward expansion and the railroad led to a national market so that people in the West, like ranchers and farmers and miners, could send their stuff back east, and then industries in the east could send their finished goods out west. Then in the last unit, we looked at the factors of production, dealing with technology and land and labor. Today, we're going to look at the role of capitalism and its impact on democracy. We're going to talk about new industries. We're going to talk about Rockefeller and Carnegie. We're going to talk about the availability of consumer goods and how that led to a rise in the standard of living. Then we're going to talk about the role of entrepreneurs and the rise of business through monopoly and the influence of business ideologies. As you can see by this standard, there are three big words to know: capitalism, democracy, and entrepreneur. You should know democracy pretty easily by now. We're going to talk about capitalism, and then we're going to talk about entrepreneurs as well. So capitalism is characterized by private ownership of property. That's really important to understand. And so idea is that businesses, they own their property privately. The government doesn't own it. The people own it. And the use of that property is used to make a profit. And this goes along with like democratic ideals of individual freedom and opportunity. So the government doesn't control private property, people do. And so you can do what you want with that private property. If you want to start a business, then you can start a business. So capitalism is kind of like a free market idea. Before the Civil War, businesses raised large amounts of capital by selling stock, and that's how some of those industries in the North got started. And that's going to be kind of a similar thing after the Civil War. But it's not like a new idea after the Civil War is kind of what I want you to know there. After the Civil War, corporations became larger by mergers and monopolies. Part of that was spurred by the Civil War, and some of those industries had gotten larger during the war, and then also the railroads afterwards. People do begin to criticize corporations and say that they're gaining too much power, and I'll talk about a couple of specific instances of that in a few minutes. The railroad is really essential to the growth of the economy. It is the economic engine that drives the economy. That transcontinental railroad united the East and the West and developed a national market, like I just explained. It also led to a growth in the industries that were needed to make railroads, like steel and wood and railroad car manufacturers. All those industries had to make stuff and provide stuff to the railroads, and so that led to an economic boom. It also led to an increase in the meatpacking industry and the coal industry. So you could have like a rancher in the West, and they'd be able to put their cows on trains and send them east. So that's a big deal. They also have minerals and stuff like coal and iron ore that are found out west that they're able to ship back east on the railroads. And new towns developed along the railroad's route. And so some of the famous towns in the West, like Chicago, St. Louis, those are all towns that were on the railroad. And competition is actually brutal between the railroads. And that's why in Monopoly, those are four of the biggest pieces in the game of Monopoly. They are very competitive with each other, and their competition actually leads to depressions in the economy and also gains in the economy. We need to talk about some entrepreneurs. These are business owners, people who create their own businesses. That's what an entrepreneur is. So we're looking at Andrew Carnegie first. He controls the steel industry, and he has a monopoly on it. He used what was called vertical integration to control the steel industry. Basically, he controls everything needed in the production of steel, from the mining of iron ore all the way to the steel mill. Because if he can control everything in that organization, then it will make it cheaper. And we'll talk more about, I'll give you a couple of examples of that in class as well. The other most famous guy at the time is John Rockefeller. He is the owner of Standard Oil. He uses a lot of different types of practices. One thing he does is he tries to drive his competitors out of business. He actually demanded kickbacks from the railroads and lower prices from the railroads in order for him to undersell the market. And he's going to use horizontal integration to buy out other similar businesses like other oil refineries so he controls the entire market. And I'll explain that in class as well. So it's kind of the opposite of vertical integration. Vertical integration, you're buying out everything needed to make that product. Horizontal integration, you're buying out similar types of businesses. So for instance, McDonald's would buy out like Burger King or Wendy's. Those are all similar types of businesses. He also uses a business practice called a trust. And what he would use that trust for is to undersell the market. So he'd come in, he'd set up his business, and he'd start selling his oil at a price that's so low that his competitors couldn't keep up. Kind of what's happening in Rock Hill right now with QT. So what they're doing is they're setting their prices really, really low, so they're not making very much money. But what's going to happen is his competitors start going out of business. And once his competitors go out of business, then he can raise his prices. And I'll talk about the actual QT example in class. A trust is really a monopoly, and you need to know that a trust is a monopoly. So this is a way where they buy out stock in other companies and put them into a business called a trust. And it basically led to those businesses being a monopoly. So trust and monopoly are basically the same thing, and you need to know those are basically the same thing in class. People do start to get wary of people like John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan, these people who are monopolists. And so the government actually passes what's called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is to outlaw trusts or to outlaw monopolies. Unfortunately, it's really not used that well at the time, and the government's actually going to use it to outlaw labor unions and say that labor unions are trusts and monopolies, which doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't make any sense to you, but I'll try to do a little bit better job explaining that and giving you some examples in class. Some of the pros and cons of big business, critics called these people like Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan, called them robber barons, thought the government protected them too much and aided them, and anytime there was a strike, the government would join in on their sides. And so people at the time would call them robber barons. Other people would call them captains of industry. So it's kind of a debate still going on to this day what they're referred to. It does lead to economic instability, having these monopolies. The problem is these monopolies control so much of the economy that if they struggle, then it's going to really hurt the economy. And so there are frequent economic depressions during this time period. There is, on the pro side of that though, there's this pro-business ideology in the United States, and it's called the captains of industry. They're called captains of industry, and they justify their actions by saying that they worked hard and that they should be successful because they were better than everybody else. And that's kind of what the idea of social Darwinism is. So it's kind of like Darwinism, survival of the fittest, but applied in a social setting. So the belief that survival of the fittest applies to the business world. So basically, Rockefeller's succeeding because he's better, he works harder, he's smarter than everybody else, and that's why he's in charge. So that's a really big idea to understand, and we're going to use that idea a lot in this class. Laissez-faire capitalism is also the belief at the time that the government shouldn't regulate the economy. The government should stay out of the economy. The hands-off idea, that it should be a free market. Let the businesses control themselves. The government shouldn't be involved. The problem with that at this time is that the government is involved, it's just involved in helping big businesses. So it's not regulating the businesses that much. What it's doing is helping the businesses. So laissez-faire isn't quite true. They do think the government should intervene to help management against labor unions, and they also believe that the government should set high tariffs. So the government is involved in the economy, it's just not regulating the businesses. Popular literature at the time also showed the myth that basically as long as you worked hard, you could succeed. And this is the whole rags to riches idea that you just have to work hard. If you just work hard, then you're going to succeed. Horatio Auger is the famous writer, and he had all these little like dime store books, what they called, where he basically talked about the story about how this person went from nothing to rich, and this is kind of like the American dream, that you can have nothing, but then you just work hard and you'll succeed. The problem with that is it's not true. The gospel of wealth is also an idea at the time, and said that those business owners had a responsibility to help others, and so they do. They actually give a lot of money away. Carnegie and Rockefeller gave millions away to philanthropies, and this was actually recorded in newspapers how much they gave away, and they gave away a ton of money. In fact, if you go a lot of places up north, a lot of libraries are actually called the Carnegie Library because Carnegie gave a lot of money to build libraries in particular. Despite the monopolies, there is a rise in the standard of living. So people were able to buy more than ever before, and there's a lot of new products available for them to buy. The problem is not everybody gets to take part in that standard of living, that rise in the standard of living. There is a deflation for farmers, meaning the prices of crops are going down, so farmers have less money, and there's also low wages for workers. So they really don't share in that economic boom and the high standard of living, and the new products are not really able to buy them. And there isn't the misconception is that there's an assembly line at this time, and that's really not true yet. That's going to be later with Henry Ford and the Ford Company. Well, that's really it. Thank you for watching. Please go to Canvas and turn in your notes guide and take the video quiz. Please write your name in ink on the notes guide, and we'll talk about some of these big ideas in class. I mean, really, there's some very important ideas like social Darwinism, laissez-faire. There's vertical integration, horizontal integration, trusts. So there's a lot of big ideas that we're going to discuss in class in detail. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.